Good morning, everyone. Please join me in Gassho as I read a passage from Reverend Dr. Taittsu Unno's book, River of Fire, River of Water. There are 84,000 paths to liberation and freedom from self-delusion, according to Buddhism. This wealth of possibilities may seem to make liberation more accessible, but they are not spelled out in some Enlightenment mail order catalog. Which path a person takes is often not a matter of choice, but decided by the accidents of birth, circumstance, encounters, and quirks of fate. Yet, there are defining moments for each of us that can change the entire course of life. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. During my 4 years at Ekoji Buddhist Temple in Northern Virginia, I had the very good fortune to encounter my teacher and Tokudo sponsor, Reverend Kurt Rai. Rai Sensei would often start his Dharma talks with the question, "What brought you here to Ekoji today?" Perhaps it was a search for a teacher, the Buddha. Perhaps it was in search of the Dharma teachings, or perhaps in search of a community, the Sangha. Or perhaps you were born into the religion. I've posed the same question to the San Diego Sangha on a couple of occasions, but I'd like you to consider the question with a bit of a different twist. And that question now is, what was the defining moment that changed the course of your life and resulted in your being here today? Perhaps that defining moment was your birth into a Shin Buddhist family, or like me, perhaps you were seeking relief from suffering and hoping for a happier, more meaningful life. Taittsu Unno's defining moment was the suicide of his best friend during his college years in Japan. He was shaken by the fact that he had seen his friend the day before his friend committed suicide, but on that day he saw him, he had no inkling that his friend was in such a state of despair enough to end his life. After this tragic incident, a young college-aged Unno sensei embarked on a quest to find answers to 3 existential questions. And I think that most of us have asked this question before. Who am I? What am I? Where did my life come from and where is my life going? As I was reading his story, what captured my attention was that although Unno sensei came from a very long lineage of Jodo Shinshu ministers, he himself did not have an instruction manual, a practical guide to help him along his quest to find answers to his questions. But he persisted, he stayed on the path, he's found teachers and others, Shin Buddhist devotees, who helped guide him in his understanding of the Dharma. And eventually he experienced the practical benefits of Shinran's teachings. As Unno sensei expresses in his book, I'd like to read a passage. He says, quote, "All world religions grapple with these questions, but in my case, due to fortunate karmic circumstances, Shin Buddhism provides the answers that are illuminating, challenging, and constantly evolving. Despite the wealth of possibilities we may seem to have in the 84,000 paths to enlightenment, it is through encountering great difficulties and reaching an incredible impasse that we discover our individual paths. The Pure Land tradition has been my path. It is because of my own personal experience with it that I wish to share it with those who may not be too familiar with the depth, scope, and richness of this significant expression of Buddhism." There are 2 aspects to this phrase that really caught my attention. And the first is, his stating that it's through encountering great difficulties and reaching an incredible impasse that we discover our individual paths. That really struck me. But what I want to focus today on is his statement that because of his own personal experience with Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, that he desired to share it. It was such a gift, this experience, that he wanted to share it with people who were not familiar with the significant expression of Buddhism known as Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. On a personal note, about 15 years ago, I encountered Jodo Shinshu, seeking relief from despair. And although not to the breadth or depth of Unno Sensei's experience and his search, encountering this path, the Shin Buddhist path, has been such a gift that I understand his desire and wish also to share it with others. And I believe, this is Kenji Sensei's quest. Although Kenji Sensei himself was born into a devout Jodo Shinshu family, he aspires to share, quote, the depth, scope, and richness of the Shin path, and in a language that's understandable to those who are not familiar with Jodo Shinshu and Shinran Shonin's teachings, but who are seeking relief from suffering. And so strong, I think, is this compassion for others in Kenji Sensei, that when he retired from his career as a dentist, he didn't just relax, lay back, but he immediately embarked upon getting the academic background and training, going through ordination, to embark on his current vocation as a Shin Buddhist minister. Akahoshi Sensei addresses this issue in the February issue of Busei Script, our Buddhist Temple of San Diego's monthly newsletter. His practical approach, directed not just at newcomers, but perhaps especially to those born and raised in the Jodo Shinshu tradition, is to start with gratitude, to start with recognizing all we have received and simply say thank you. Kenji Sensei, I know that many of us has heard him say, it's the shift from please to thank you. And starting with this simple practice of saying thank you infuses us with the experience of thank you and eventually transforms and moves us to a deeper understanding of the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. It moves us from mere repetition and recitation to a spontaneous and emotional response in gratitude for being the beneficiaries of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. So for newcomers and for old-timers, thank you is one simple tool to start us on the path. But as Sensei is quick to remind us in his article, quote, he says, I agree that an introduction to Shin could be simplified, but for adults who are seeking resolution to life's problems, there are no simple solutions to life itself. The Dharma is an explanation of the truth of life. It depends on the experience of the listener. In other words, although saying thank you is easy enough, it isn't a magic elixir. In order to truly benefit from the teachings, we can start with this simple practice of thank you, but we must continue to study and delve deeper into the teachings of Shinran Shonin as passed down to him from Shakyamuni Buddha, and through those he defines as his predominant teachers. I'd like to suggest that we begin, especially, not just, I guess, especially newcomers, but all of us, that we learn from our Dharma school staff and children. And they have created a toolbox, and they have created gratitude journals. At least the high school class is doing a gratitude journal. But all the children have happiness toolboxes. And it is actually a little box. And in that box, there are strips of paper with tools, guides, written guides to help them get through challenging times, tools to remind them to be happy, tools to help them live their best and most authentic lives, which I think is a very meaningful goal for all of us as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists to have. So I'd like to share some of the tools I have in my toolbox. To seek Buddha, meaning for me, it's a reminder to seek teachers, to listen to as many Jodo Shinshu scholars and ministers, minister scholars as I can, but also to seek those enlightened Jodo Shinshu followers. They may not have reverend after their name, but they are very well versed in the Dharma. I've heard, or maybe you've heard, that one of the practices of Jodo Shinshu Buddhists is deep hearing. Do you ever hear a Dharma talk? Maybe you're hearing it now, and maybe you're not saying wow, but I hear Dharma talks and I'm like, wow, I'm really inspired. And then I walk out of the Hondo, out of the temple, and someone says, hey, what was it about? And I'm like, what was it about? I know I was impressed. I know I was inspired. But I say, you know what? That's okay. Alice Unno, the wife of Taittsu Unno, years ago, I went to hear him speak, and he introduced her and asked her to speak. She was the one who introduced me to the concept of sedimentation. And I think this is part of deep hearing, is that we seek opportunities to hear the Dharma. And even though we may not understand it the first time or even the second time around, maybe by the third or maybe by the 10th time, it will have settled. We will be infused. We will have heard it enough that, one day it's like, I get it. It's that aha moment. And so I was a newbie and I was very intimidated because I didn't know anything. And it really comforted me and made me want to hear more of the Dharma. Another tool in my toolbox is to be alert to the Dharma, the universal truths, to wisdom and compassion, because that Dharma, the wisdom and compassion, it surrounds us, but we have to be aware. We have to be able to see those moments of wisdom, of compassion, an opportunity for us to experience the Dharma. A very simple tool is to start my day with thank you. I don't always remember, so sometimes it helps me to pull that one out of the toolbox so I can be reminded. And to end my day with thank you. Might have had maybe a very challenging day, but I survived enough to be able to, and here's another one of my tools, get a good night's rest. I tend to be much more challenged. I tend to get more stressed, frustrated, angry when I don't have enough sleep. One of my favorite tools is take an afternoon nap. And of course, the older I get, that one is a great tool. Connect with Dharma friends. We at BTSD have a weekly Shoshinge and Wasan chanting group, and everybody is invited to attend. But we have a pretty regular group that meets on Saturdays, and I have really come to treasure those weekly sessions when I get to see my Dharma friends and to chant Shoshinge and the Wasan with them. Read a chapter from a book about Jodo Shinshu or Buddhism. There are so many books about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, whereas, 20 years ago, it was a pretty limited selection, but we have books by Bishop Harada, Dr. Jeff Wilson, Dr. Taittsu Unno, Reverend Laverne Sensei, Kenneth Tanaka, the Gomonshu, Reverend Suji, and many, many others. Reverend Aoyama also we have a book. His book is in our bookshop. So those are some practical tools that will help us get started on our Shin Buddhist path. But one of the biggest tools for me is the reminder of how fortunate I was to encounter Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. Because if I can look beyond the trappings of the rules, some of the doctrinal rules, the bureaucratic power structure of religious institutions, I realize that Jodo Shu and Jodo Shinshu were not meant to be intellectual or academic exercises, but rather perhaps pragmatic, contemplative, encouraging self-reflection and experiential opportunities. I don't think that Honen or Shindan intended the teachings to become hierarchical and bureaucratic organizations, but rather their desire was egalitarian. They never intended the teachings to become pedagogical, but rather to be shared with all people, especially with people who would not otherwise have access to the teachings or the rituals that were meant to ensure birth in the Pure Land, nirvana. Honen and Shindan aspired to reach those who needed the Dharma the most, the masses who were suffering, encountering unspeakable hardships due to the circumstances of their birth and within the context of their times. And those masses, I think, include people like me, and I think perhaps many of you. So please join me in Gassho. There are 84,000 paths to liberation and freedom from self-delusion according to Buddhism. This wealth of possibilities may seem to make liberation more than accessible, but they are not spelled out in some enlightenment mail order catalog. Which path a person takes is often not a matter of choice, but decided by the accidents of birth, circumstance, encounters, and quirks of fate. Yet there are defining moments for each of us that can change the entire course of life. Words of Reverend Dr. Taittsu Unno. In closing, I leave you with this question. What was the defining moment that changed the course of your life that resulted in your being here today? Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda.